Welcome to The Healing Equation. I'm Grace, the founder of Agora Health.
And my name is Jasmine, founder of Body in the City.
In this series, we explore women's health, wellbeing, and healing in the modern world, speaking to experts, innovators, and advocates in the space to help you along your wellness journey.
So take a seat, get comfy, and join us for another empowering episode.
Welcome to today's episode of The Healing Equation. Today we are joined by Lola Ornato, who is a midwife and midwifery lecturer at university. Lola, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Very well. So we were just talking before we started about birth.
Yeah.
And I was saying that I had watched the program One Born Every Minute, I think it's called, and how traumatizing it is to watch somebody else give birth. So firstly, do you remember what it was like to see your first real life birth? And also what made you then think, I want to do this every day. I want to see people giving birth on a daily basis?
Oh, okay. That's a really good question because thinking about it now, I'm wondering whether I'd actually seen a birth before I became a student midwife.
I think you didn't.
I probably did. Are you thinking it would have put me off? I don't actually think I had seen anyone giving birth apart from sort of televised, in the movie type birth, so you don't really see anything. So I think my first birth was as a student midwife and I remember everything. I remember the midwife I was with. I remember not necessarily the mum, but I remember the midwife describing all the stages that the baby goes through. So like when the baby's head came out, when it turns. And I remember it almost being in slow motion, like almost as if the woman was controlling it just so I could see. And to be honest, I didn't feel like, I know a lot of people look at birth and think, oh my God, it was just so amazing. I don't think I felt like that. I don't know if that's a cultural thing for me. Like to me, it's just like women give birth and I'm going to be a midwife and this is what I am going to witness to be a midwife. So I think when I look back now, I think that was really amazing. Yeah. Because I think sometimes I think in this day and age, it's so rare to just see birth undisturbed. So I think I'm more appreciative of it now than I was then.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's amazing. And so obviously midwifery is one of those, I guess, very underrated professions, but it's incredibly important. What does midwifery really encapsulate? Like, how do you help a mother from pre-birth, during birth, and then also that support afterwards?
Yeah. So as midwives, so we are, for want of a better word, we're sort of like the experts in normality or physiology. There's been a lot of controversy around the word normal because obviously women who maybe birth without going into labour, who have elective cesarean sections or even emergency cesarean sections, have been known to say that they feel like they're being told that their births aren't normal. But I think from looking at the role of a midwife, we are there to support physiology, or when everything goes with when you have someone who doesn't have any medical complications. So we're there to support the women antenatally, which is like before they give birth, while they're pregnant, during the labour and the birth, and then postnatally as well. So as a midwife, we would see women when they get pregnant. They come to us for their first appointment, which is called a booking appointment, where we take a medical history and then we sort of guide them through that pregnancy. So they come and see us on a regular basis up until they give birth. And then once they have given birth, we would then visit them at home. And our role then is also to support them with feeding their babies, support them in their choices, talk to them about things like safe sleeping with the baby, what to expect from the baby. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And what we would then do as midwives with women who do have complications is we would refer them on to the medical professionals. So we would still support them. So they still come and see us. But say they developed a complication or maybe they had a medical condition that they had from birth, we would still support them as midwives, but then they would be under the care of the doctors.
That's really beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
I feel like midwives in general are like such unsung heroes in the medical industry, especially because of, I guess, how the midwifery came about. It was midwives that were just typically giving or helping women to give birth. It was in either at home, it wasn't necessarily in a hospital, it was just led by midwives. How do you feel as though that midwife journey from like going back into like the 1950s to date has changed over the years?
I think the first thing that I would say is that at the moment, birth has just generally become very medicalized. So I think the role of the midwife is quite confused.
Yeah.
I would say when I was training, for me, there was sort of like a definite role that we're there for all the physiology and we're there to support normality within birth. And if anything was to go out of the normal, we can recognize that and refer women on to the doctor. What I feel at the moment is we've become a little bit more defensive in our practice. Like nobody wants to get sued if something goes wrong. So what we've done is we've put all these measures in place to prevent anything bad from happening.
Right.
But actually what that's then doing is it's not supporting women just being women and being able to go through a pregnancy and give birth, which I think then leads to a lot of, so at the moment the buzzword is birth trauma. So you have women who go through a birth and maybe they had birth in a hospital or they were sort of coerced into having a medical procedure that they weren't necessarily on board with, but were told that either their lives or their baby's lives were in danger. And then they come out the other end and everybody's like, but you've got a healthy baby and you're healthy. But actually they've got that birth trauma and then they've got to cope with that psychological reaction to being traumatized. And some people can't bond with their babies. And I think we're being a little bit short-sighted. There's two things that I think is going on at the moment. I think that our role has evolved and not necessarily in a good way. So I think we've come out of being midwives and we've become obstetric nurses.
Right.
And I also think maybe the leadership within midwifery that is supporting us being midwives is not as strong as it was when I was training. So when I was training and when I qualified as a midwife, the hospital that I worked at, the midwives were midwives and the doctors were doctors and we worked together. So the doctors wouldn't come into my room unless I asked them to come into the room. Now what you're getting is you might be working on a labour ward and the doctors knock on the door and they say, we want to come and say hello. Now, I'm not putting doctors down by any means. I know I don't know what it must feel like, but I can imagine what it must feel like if you're in charge of a labour ward and you've got to oversee all these women and you're thinking, I do just want to just come in and say hello and just make sure that actually Lola is okay in that room, but also I want to just have a heads up in case something does go wrong. But for me as a midwife, I'm thinking you've knocked on the door, you have disrupted the oxytocin that is flowing. That woman now is going to be put back 3-4 hours, or maybe that is actually going to make us start to think that something is going wrong. And we've got to think about the psychology behind birth and the hormones that we release and the reason why we release those hormones. And that oxytocin hormone is such an important hormone within birth, within raising your baby, within breastfeeding your baby, and it gets disturbed all the time and we're not thinking about that. So when that doctor's coming into the room and maybe putting on the light so that they can see the CTG monitor that's monitoring the baby's heartbeat, they don't realise how much they've disrupted that woman's labour and then what that long-term effect is. Because as midwives, let's be honest, we're not really in women and their babies' lives for very long. So, I mean, I'm sure there are women that I've looked after that maybe they weren't happy with something that I did and I've just skipped out of the room thinking everything's okay. But 20 years down the line, they still remember what I might have said or done with them. I was always told as a student midwife, and I tell my students now, you need to really be careful how you talk to women because they never forget what their midwives say. I've had 3 babies. I can tell you from start to finish what all the midwives said to me in labour. And not all of it was very good. So you know, I think like my oldest is nearly 17 and my youngest is 9. And I still carry some of the things that were said to me. So I think we're just in a very, very difficult place at the moment. I think it's difficult to, sometimes we're sort, you know, if you are trying to protect midwifery, you're almost being seen as you're pushing that normal birth, you know, nobody wants that, you know, you're trying to push that on women. But then on the other side of the coin is, but if we are under this medical module that actually isn't what midwifery is supposed to be about, are we thinking about the long-term effects on women and babies? And we're really not.
And I guess also a question I want to ask is, around obviously birth, there is now more of a focus on mental well-being afterwards, but a lot of mums really do struggle with depression and mental health issues and psychological issues. How much in your experience is that I guess, understood early on, and how much support is really given to women? Or is there still quite a lot that needs to be done in that framework to support them after the birth?
Yeah, I think we're doing better. I think a lot of hospitals now have like a dedicated perinatal mental health team, so that, you know, when a woman does come for that first appointment, if there are certain markers, or they're like, if she's revealed something about her mental health, for example, she's then referred on to a team. There is usually a perinatal mental health midwife or nurse as well within that team. So I think women are being supported a bit better. I think maybe sometimes it might vary from hospital to hospital what you're going to get. We are definitely more aware of it. I don't necessarily think that it prevents people from having birth trauma, because I think that's almost a separate issue. Like, so women will get mental health support, but we are still in this sort of medicalized system where almost everybody at the moment who comes through the doors is deemed to have some kind of risk that then puts them on this pathway. And I think maybe what we need to be looking at is, yes, it's really good that we've got this perinatal mental health support for this woman throughout her pregnancy, but can we also consider the birth and the choices? And I think if the women understand the choices and they're happy with it and they're happy to go ahead with it, I think that's fine. But I think sometimes there is coercion within maternity services that doesn't always end well for anybody, to be honest.
Yeah, I think I can speak for that personally. A little bit of coercion. It's not very like in your face. It's very overt.
Yeah.
You know, it forms a disguise under things like pressure, and you feel as though if you don't do something that you want to do, your baby's going to suffer. And I think just going back to when talking about oxytocin and that release, or that peak and that rise of, that peak and that drop of oxytocin, many people may not know what oxytocin is, but it's that kind of feel-good hormone, and it kind of helps with the labour and it helps with breastfeeding, etc. And I strongly believe that when you leave your house to go to the labour ward because you feel like your waters have broken or you're in early active labour, that in itself, just that move from your like home environment where you've been for the last 9 to 10 months, where you've been nurturing for this baby, and then going to this very sterile room, these very bright lights with people with different conditions, how could that not stifle your labour journey? You know, and no one's really looking at that. Like, no one's saying, okay. And then what for me happened is it was interrupted. I found out that my waters had broken without me really realising. And then the doctors come in, like Lola was saying, and then you're thinking, well, something's wrong. And no one's speaking to you and explain to you what's actually happening. I'm just here to say hello. You know, there's doctors after doctors, and then you're being monitored. And then before you know it, 2-3 days later, you're having a C-section 5 weeks early, which was my case. And it felt like there was so many checkpoints where someone could have sat down with me and said, don't worry, this is what's happening and why we're doing this. For me, it just felt like a cascade of interventions. Like one thing led to the other and one thing led to the other. And it felt like this trajectory to just get the baby out safely, albeit, but it didn't feel like what I necessarily wanted in that moment was considered. It felt very much like the direction is and the goal is to get the baby out healthy, and that's everybody's goal. But I did leave there with trauma. I did leave thinking, could I have said no? I didn't know my birthrights. I didn't understand what I was signing. I just wanted my baby to be healthy. So I think a lot of women should take away from that point is, I would personally have stayed home longer or spoken to a midwife on the phone, explained my problems to her over the phone more. But to think about, if you are going to rush to the hospital, but you've got a birth plan, just know that you may or may not be interrupting that flow of having potentially a natural birth.
Yeah.
That's what I believe.
Yeah.
So you were both pro at-home births, because we were chatting about this.
I mean,
and I was like, I sat down convinced that I was like, I've always thought I'd want a planned C-section.
No, you don't, Grace. You don't want a planned C-section.
And you were both like, no. But I don't know about, I mean, I would say my biggest concern about having a birth at home would be if something were to happen in an emergency, like depending as well what area you live in, even just of London, like an ambulance could take half an hour to get to you, and half an hour could be detrimental to you and the baby's life. So I think I would just be too afraid.
Which is fair.
Personally.
I think that's, I do think that's fair. I think for me, what I would say is, it's almost like you need to go further back. And I don't have any problems with people choosing to have a cesarean section.
Mm-hmm.
What I have an issue with is maybe not understanding birth and the fear around birth.
Yeah.
So I think, so for example, some people would choose a cesarean section because they're absolutely scared of birth. But having a cesarean section is also birth.
Yeah.
So I think what needs to be worked on is the fear around birth.
Yeah.
And I think after all of that, if you think, I want to have a cesarean section, fine.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily think that having a cesarean section because you're scared of birth will take away the fear of birth.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I would still be very afraid.
Yeah. So I think so if you're going to be
scary.
fearful both ways, can we maybe look at you exploring what's making you fearful and see whether we can work on that and help you through that. And if you still want a cesarean section at the end of it, fine.
Yeah.
For me, I was completely the opposite. I was like, well, women just give birth. I have to explain myself a little bit as well. I'm a little bit of a weird mix of cultures.
Yeah.
And I do think culture came into it for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I was born in this country, but I went to Nigeria when I was 6 and I came back when I was 20. And so my views around birth growing up was very much like people just go and have babies. Yeah. I'm not saying the people around me didn't have cesarean sections, but actually I didn't know whether they did or they didn't. But it wasn't such a big deal. It was just common. You just see people with babies and that was it.
Yeah.
And then I came over here and I did midwifery, and when I was training, like I said, we were very much supported to be midwives. Yeah. And a lot of what I saw when I was training was women giving birth. Obviously, there were women that had emergency cesarean sections, and there were cases where you think, oh, was that woman sort of like coerced a little bit? And did she actually get a chance to have a choice in what happened, or did she understand what was happening? But for the most part, everything just seemed fairly sort of physiological to me. But I think I still had that sort of Nigerian mindset that people just give birth. So when I had my babies, it didn't really occur to me to do anything other than have them at home.
Yeah.
To the point where I said to my husband, if the baby doesn't come out, I'm going to teach her how to do a cesarean section because I'm not going into I mean, obviously that would not have happened. I would have gone into the hospital. But I was just like, you're just going to have to get the baby out some way because I'm not going into the hospital.
Your poor husband.
But see, the thing is, so Fulvio is Italian, but actually he also worked in Nigeria. So he also has that kind of mindset of like women give birth. So he was just a bit like, But I think it helped that he was like that because I have friends who had partners that were very fearful.
Yes.
And that was the reason why they went in to give birth. Because again, disrupting that oxytocin, if you're going to have someone supporting you that is really fearful, that also disrupts the oxytocin. So I have colleagues who went in and went to a birth center because it was just, it made their partner feel a little bit more secure.
Yeah.
So my first came 4 weeks early. And I did labour very quickly. And when we called, because I felt my dates were slightly different to the scans, they said they were only going to go by the scan date, which made her 4 weeks premature. So they said, you have to come in. But I absolutely waited until the very last minute.
Okay.
And so literally got in because I was also going to a hospital where nobody knew me. So I was working at one hospital and I gave birth in another hospital and they didn't know me as a midwife. Yeah. And I think in retrospect, I maybe should have just had my colleagues look after me. But with the second and the third, I had them at home. I was just like, there's no way I'm going in. But I wasn't fearful.
Yeah.
And I think going to your point of if something happens, I think that's where I get a little bit, I wish people would understand the training that we go through. Yeah. Midwives are trained to the point where they would recognize, and actually if you were at home, they're more likely to transfer you in a little bit quicker than if you're in a birth center within a hospital. So they wouldn't sit on you thinking, oh, this is going to pan out okay. So on the birth center, like sometimes on a birth center, which is so in terms of where you can give birth, you can either give birth at home, you can give birth in a hospital labour ward, which is where all the doctors are and the midwives, or you can give birth in a birth centre, which is a midwife-led birth centre, which sometimes is a standalone, so away from the hospital or within the hospital unit. Okay. So a lot of hospitals will have an alongside birth centre. Yeah. So on the birth centre, if I think something is not quite right, but the woman's about to give birth, I know I can make a phone call and a paediatrician will be in a room because I don't need an obstetrician at that point if the woman's going to give birth. If I'm worried about the baby and the baby's about to come, I know I need a paediatrician in the room, not an obstetrician. But if I was at home and I had some concerns, I would have made that transfer a lot quicker.
Okay.
if there were concerns. And it's not necessarily that I would have sat on the woman on the birth centre either. But I think midwives are very skilled in recognising when things go wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that is everybody's concern. Like, what if something goes wrong at home? And it, you know, I mean, with my third, the midwife thought something was going wrong. And just to think about speed, I think within about 2 minutes, there were 7 people in my living room. I mean, I will say she overly panicked. There was really nothing going on at all.
Yeah.
She just, I don't know, for some reason, just as I was pushing the baby out, just got a bit panicky.
Yeah.
But rapid response came within a minute.
Wow.
It was almost like they were outside the door.
Waiting.
So 2 people came with rapid response. And then the ambulance came with 3 paramedics. So there was the 2 rapid response, the 3 in the ambulance and the 2 midwives. So my children came down to find their brother, and like 7 people just standing around me with the baby in my arms like this. So I think that is a real fear.
Yeah.
But sometimes I always think as well that we need to understand that sometimes when all is said and done, some things will happen. And maybe we won't necessarily get the outcome that we want. And that can happen in a home setting or a birth setting, a birth centre or a labour ward. But you're right, there might be a slight delay with transferring from home to going into the hospital.
Yeah. I think really it comes down to like education and really understanding, like you said, the birth process, which again is one of those many things that as women, they don't teach us, we don't really talk about. I don't think like mums probably really discuss it. I mean, do you discuss it with your kids, for example?
Yeah. But that's only because like literally a lot of my friends are midwives, so they always walk into me having a phone conversation about birth. So it's not necessarily that I discuss it, but they're around it a lot.
Yeah.
They're around. Yeah. Like, you know, I talk about it to my husband. I talk about it to my friends. You know, I have a lot of friends who are having babies, so they often come to me for advice. So it's like they're around it.
Yeah.
And they do ask questions. And, you know, I know a lot of people say, I do say to them, like, please don't go and shout this out in the middle of the playground. This is like just between me and you. But I remember once my then 8-year-old said to me, how did you push me out? I was like, oh, God, how does one answer that question? And I was like, well, I told him, I said, there's a, you know, like I have a uterus and there's like, it grows when you're inside me. And then when you go into labor, the uterus starts to squeeze itself and helps the baby come out. And then I pushed you out and you came up between my legs. And he was like, oh, and he kind of just went off. But I was sweating through that conversation like, oh my God. And I have, you know, in our house, we use the correct name for body parts. But I do say to them, please don't go and shout that out in the middle of the playground because I really don't want to find myself in the head teacher's office. But they're just around it a little bit. But I think that's also because of my job.
Yeah, but I think that's so important because even just like talking, as you were saying, about using the right terminology for your body, most people don't. So then you reach pregnancy and birth and you just base it off what you've seen or what other people have told you, but not because you have necessarily been taught. And I think that's probably as well where fear, lack of confidence or lack of knowledge kind of comes into play. And then you trust healthcare providers, which gives you then that feeling of
just
also,
powerlessness. You just don't understand. Many women today don't really know their own body parts. They can't name their reproductive system. They're not sure about many of those things. Lots of men don't understand their wives' menstrual cycle. And the phases and the attributes that go with those phases. It is a lot. There's still a lot of education that needs to be done. Especially if you're considering having children. It's just something you just cannot avoid. You can't sugarcoat it and leave it to professionals and doctors to just go through the experience whilst you're passive. You have to be very, very active in it. And I think that touches on my next topic about just the healthcare system in general. I think the current statistic or report suggests that there's like, you know, up to 3 or 4 times, like black women are 3 or 4 times more likely to die during childbirth. You know, and that statistic is horrifying. You know, that's a really horrifying statistic, especially in the UK in 2025. How did we get here, and how can women who look like us advocate for themselves, educate themselves, and what can they say to make sure that they are being looked after in the best possible way?
Oh, okay, that's quite a deep question. But no, you're right. And actually, so I went to 5 times more. They had done, so they've done their second report now. So the Black Maternity Experience Report. So the first report highlighted the figures. The second report kind of covered a little bit what you were saying about how can women advocate for themselves. And so the statistics are slightly better, but they're better because Black women are learning to advocate for themselves.
Good.
But we also need to be aware of the trauma that comes with having to advocate for yourself.
Absolutely.
So we shouldn't have to sort of go in there ready to do battle.
Yeah.
And so what their figures showed is that the statistics are slightly better, but they're not better because the system has changed. They're better because women are being a little bit more clued up and they are doing the research and they are accessing things like 5 times more in the motherhood group, and they're going online to find out what their rights are. And so they're going in prepared for battle. But that comes with an emotional toll,
Absolutely.
you know. So in terms of what we can do, I mean, if I was being idealistic, I'd say that, you know, we need to change the system. But I think the reality of it is that it's very difficult to change the system. And if there are changes that are being made, they're not being made quick enough. I think also sometimes, I think when I first started looking at it, I thought it was things like this sort of generalization around the Black body. So Black people are less likely to feel pain. Black skin is thicker, so if you're taking blood, you need to push the needle harder. Black women can breastfeed, you know, they don't need breastfeeding support. But it's a lot deeper than that. So those are like things that we, you know, those are those common sort of stereotypes that are associated with Black people. But I was reading this book called Divided, and it's about like decolonizing healthcare. And it goes back to white supremacy and actually scientists, so-called scientists in the time, coming up with this like pseudoscience, which is basically a bunch of lies and sort of saying that, you know, all Black people can't do this, this and this, or their skulls will look differently, or their noses are different. And I'm being a bit flippant, but basically creating this sort of like really fake science that had sort of sat in you know, in medical books for forever. And people had looked at that and thought this is the way the Black body is. So for me, it's a bit deeper than that. It's almost like when we are training medical professionals and when we're training midwives and nurses, is that we need to decolonize the education that they're getting. We need to get them to understand that we have been sold this stereotype. Even myself, like coming from Nigeria, there was always this thing about like, you know, you had to be well behaved and you shouldn't be like those other Black people. But nobody would ever define who are the other Black people that you're talking about. And the irony in like thinking that, like, the irony in not seeing anything wrong with that. And I mean, I came here thinking, oh, Black people are generally aggressive. And I'm like, but I'm Black myself. Like, so where has that come from? Like, where has that come from? But, you know, the irony in me not thinking that there was anything wrong with that. But that's because that's a stereotype that the whole world has been sold, that we're aggressive, we're difficult, we're hard to reach. So how do you actually change people's mindset? And how do you try and get that into the system? And I think if you can't start from there, it doesn't matter how many EDI training days we do or how many online tick box exercises we need to do to get our, you know, our mandatory training done for the day. It's not going to change. And I don't really know what the answer is. I know that sometimes working outside the system is a lot more satisfying than it is working in the system. So I try to do things like go to things like 5 times more and come to your events, you know, where you connect with like-minded people. And even if it's just like a little workshop that you do for 20 people or providing antenatal classes or being like, sometimes I will say to people, here's my number. If you want to give me a call about anything that you're worried about in your pregnancy or any questions that are not being answered, obviously I'm not your midwife, but if there's something that you want, then I can help you. So
building community, isn't it? That's what we need more.
I mean, one of my friends said to me, she was expecting her 3rd baby, and up until then it hadn't been a problem. So she'd had 2 births, and then this 3rd time, I think she was 40, and they said to her, we're not going to let you get to 40 weeks. so we'll break your waters at 38 weeks. And she was like, huh? What? Where did that come from?
Yeah.
Like, that wasn't what happened with my second two. And they're like, well, you're 40 and you're black. And she was like, yes, and because she genuinely didn't know, and they couldn't tell her either. They just said, well, you're high risk.
For what?
And she was like, high risk of what? So then, because it was when we were just coming out of COVID, so a lot of the appointments were phone appointments. So she had a consultant appointment. So I literally just gave her a script, and I said, just say to them, okay, I understand that you think I'm high risk and whatever. Can you explain what the actual risk is? And can you recalculate it for me personally? Because if somebody's at risk because they are 40, is that the same risk for somebody who's 40, who doesn't smoke, who doesn't drink, who exercises every day and has had 2 births? Is that going to be the same for somebody who is maybe not as healthy, has an underlying medical condition and is 40? Because it's probably not going to be the same. And the consultant couldn't tell her this. And she said, well, okay, thank you very much, but I'm not going to come in. I'm going to wait until I go into labour. And the consultant said to her, fine, but it will be on your head if your baby dies. And those were the exact words that he used. And so she just came back and said, well, if I ever had any faith in you now, it's completely evaporated. And she did have like a nice labour, and she gave birth, and she went into the birth centre and she gave birth in the pool. And she said, oh God, it like the baby came out in the bag, like the water didn't even break. And she was so ecstatic. But a month later, she said to me, there was still the 1% of me that thought I was making the wrong decision because of what that consultant said. And I will never forgive him for saying that. And that's where we need to be doing better. Like, we say these throwaway comments. And I know people are probably going to jump on me and say, it's not a throwaway comment. Because I did have a doctor come into my inbox once and say, I challenged them on inducing women who have big babies, like trying to get the labour started beforehand because they've got big babies. And she went into my inbox and said, we don't make these decisions lightly. And I said, I didn't say that you did. I just said that maybe we need to reconsider the information that we're giving to women, because it's not a balanced, they're not making informed choices when you're telling them, if you don't come in, something's going to happen to your baby.
I mean, I think I definitely agree when you were saying, because I go to so many events where they talk so much. And I think it's great that people nowadays are more aware of how we need to kind of look more at health inequalities, how Black community, South Asian communities also need to be looked at. But we kind of always miss the mark when we're not focusing on the actual healthcare system, the education that doctors are getting. And I think I was recently in an event and I did make this point, which not many people agreed with me. But my point was, if you're being educated within a system that is already, as you said, in that colonial imperialistic mindset and has a lot of racial bias and nuances to it, you're then going to come out as a doctor and then you kind of have to de-learn everything that you've learned in medical school to try and be more fair and equitable. Whereas why can't we look at actually what we are teaching our young doctors so that by the time they come out, they reflect having the knowledge that they need to provide for society and the multicultural society that we live in now. But I guess what I want to ask you is, for example, in midwifery and in that childbirthing process, what are some things that are racial inequalities, for example, for a Black baby that may be putting that baby or the mother at risk that wouldn't be, I guess, known to a midwife necessarily because of their learnings?
So I think the most common thing is recognizing skin conditions in Black babies. I would say the most common one is jaundice. So most babies at some point might have a little bit of jaundice. Sometimes it can be a little bit more serious. But if you don't know how to recognize that different skin tone on a baby with a darker skin, how do you know whether the baby's jaundiced? How do you know whether to step in? How do you know whether to encourage the mum to feed more? Does this baby need to actually go into the unit to see a doctor? I think I would say that's probably one of the places where I'd say there's a lot of work that's been done and has hopefully improved the way midwives assess babies with darker skin tone. So not necessarily just looking at just the skin, but looking on the eyes, looking at the palms, and also sort of pressing down to see whether there is a yellow skin tone, like when you take your thumb away. So that's probably the most common one, I would say. I think the other thing is, so They used to be called Mongolian blue spots, which is really not an appropriate term to use at all.
Yeah.
And I always forget like the full name, but you can say they're blue-grey spots.
Yeah.
And so some babies with darker skin tones are born with these like blue-grey spots on them. And actually there was, I don't know if she Malaysian recently, who was... I don't know if they took the baby away, but basically she was being accused of causing the baby to bruise. And actually what it was the fact that the baby was a darker skin tone.
Yeah.
They had these blue-grey spots on them, which is completely normal, which actually... I mean, I learned this when I trained 25 years ago. So I don't know how the medical professionals thought that this was not a thing.
Yeah.
But she was, I think I don't really remember whether she had the baby taken away, but it was a big issue where they hadn't recognised the spots, and then she was being accused of causing injury to the baby. So those are sort of like some of the things that, you know, I would say we... I think the education has got better, definitely around jaundice, I would say, and around the blue-grey spots as well for babies,
And as a lecturer, when you lecture your students and you're obviously teaching young midwives going into the profession, how do you do that through a decolonial lens?
So I don't teach the neonatal module, but my friend who does, my colleague who does is, you know, that is, and all my colleagues who do any newborn education, that is part of when we test them practically. If they are, when they come in to do so we have what's called an Oscar, which is like a practical exam where they sort of have, so it's not like a real life baby, but they have a baby in the cot and they have to demonstrate what they would do on the initial exam. They have to talk to us about how they would describe healthy skin on different tones of babies. So not necessarily the standard pink that we were always told was like a healthy baby. They would have to say, and if the baby was of darker skin tone or South Asian or black baby, I'd be looking for this skin tone in this baby. So they actually have to vocalize that to us, you know, in order to get the marks on that particular section.
Amazing.
That's really good.
Yeah.
And just in terms of birth on the day or leading up to birth, there's a lot more, I'd say, birth workers, doulas. I think that's becoming more popular in the UK. What's your opinion of them, and what's the difference between, say, a doula and a midwife?
So I like doulas. I mean, I know that I know sometimes there can be a bit of tension between them and midwives. But sometimes, and I might get shot I might get shot by my midwife colleagues, but sometimes I feel like they do the work that we should be doing, in that they're able to advocate. So a doula is a birth worker, a birth support person. They're not medically trained as like midwives are, but they have a lot of knowledge around birth. They support the woman just like midwives would during the pregnancy, during labour, afterwards as well. And I think they're really good. I think I would always say, if you don't have a doula, maybe consider getting one for the postnatal period, because I think at the moment, again, we're living such fragmented lives that we don't have our families around us. We don't have like our wise aunties or mums or sisters. And so you need someone to look after you and the baby as well. So I actually think they're really good. They can be really good, and they can be really knowledgeable for the woman. Sometimes I would say... So they create a really good relationship with the woman. And I'm not saying that midwives don't, but I think the way in which we practice just means that we just don't spend as much time as a doula would. So the only sort of downside I would say is it's almost like having, you know, if you had a sister and you were sort of trying to encourage them to do or not to do something, that sometimes they have that close relationship where... And this is, I'm going by what I have seen, so don't come for me, but I have sometimes seen the doula influence the woman's decision in a good way. But as a midwife, I would be thinking in my head, yes, I think that's a good decision to make. But as a midwife, I would be giving her A or B, you make the choice. And so I'm not saying it's a negative thing at all. I'm just saying that sometimes that can be what, as midwives, we find a bit difficult to deal with if we feel that maybe the decision is coming from the doulas. The doulas will say they're encouraging the woman, and that's what the woman's plan has always been, which I also agree with. But I think doulas are great, and I think we should use them a lot more. And it would be good if we could work with them a bit better. There is definitely tension, especially if you have someone who maybe is not wanting to come into the hospital and not wanting to come under the medical advice, and they have a doula supporting them to do that. And then they want us to go out to them because, you know, we can't say we're not going to care for someone.
Yeah.
But there have been situations where women want to give birth at home, which is their right to do, and maybe they have been told it's not a good idea from a medical standpoint, but they've had a doula support them. If you were the midwife in that situation, not every midwife would want to go out into that situation where they're thinking there's already a risk and I'm now going out to look after this woman. But I think we can work together. And I think at the end of the day, we need to accept that women do have choice. And I remember one of my students was worried about a woman who was making a choice that they felt wasn't necessarily the best. And they were trying to persuade her to see it from the medical standpoint and come into the hospital. And I said, I'm more concerned about the woman coming after you to say that you coerced her than I am her making a choice that I might not be happy with just because I'm worried about what might happen to her and the baby. As long as she understands, honestly and truthfully, it's her choice.
No, I think it's really important. I'd love to have a doula. I'd love to have a doula because they can advocate for you and you can't necessarily think for yourself, or when you're trying to just focus on like the physiology of it, trying to get the baby to move through you. That they support your partner, they can be with you, they can like explain what you want your birth to look like. There's so many benefits, and like you said, that was once a midwife, and the two came together. That would be like your perfect puzzle. I don't think I saw the same midwife twice on my first pregnancy. I always saw a different. Even my community midwife, I changed halfway, and then I like never heard from her again. Like before the baby was born, like after the baby was born, sorry. So there was this real disconnect. You didn't really want to open up to them, and post that they visit you, but they kind of, like Lola said, they just, can you breastfeed? Yes or no? Are your stitches healed? Yes or no? And then you don't really hear from them again after that point. But I think the idea of having a doula there, although there might be some like, not necessarily overstepping, but they have this closeness to you. So perhaps they're just getting very, very involved. Just having that reinforcement that I can do this, something to empower you, I think is very powerful. And the NHS and our midwives are so, not necessarily understaffed, but there's not so much resource. There's, working 12, 16-hour shifts, may not always have that energy to give you personally that hands-on, hold your hand through this 12-hour labour support. But perhaps having that doula with you by your side may well be your ticket to having a home birth that's healthy as well.
I don't mind being your doula if that was your way of asking.
I would never. She would rush me to the hospital.
Right, we're going. I've got the ambulance.
I would respect your wishes.
The ambulance now. I've had enough, she'd say.
Well, yeah, 12 hours is a bit. I'll give it 6. And then,
she'd be like, listen, I've got an appointment tomorrow. Can we wrap this up?
No, I wouldn't do that. Oh. But I think definitely there is a point in kind of, we forget about our cultural ancestry, as you said, that before women, like we've always given birth and it wasn't as traumatic. And women before would have huge families, whereas now we're having maybe 2 kids if you're lucky. And I think we've kind of forgotten how natural of a process it is. But because, like you said, it's become so, I guess, in that medical system and very much seen as a medical process. And I do think sometimes we are too binary in how we look at healthcare, and it's either very holistic and people will want doulas, home births, be maybe like really anti-hospitals. And then the other side is you have to have a doctor, listen to everything they say, etc. But I think there's also a lot to learn from looking at our cultural ancestry and doing what's right culturally for us as well. And we can only really do that looking at community, speaking to our parents, our grandparents, other people in our community and understanding what that might be like. But also as women, as a midwife, how supportive do you think women are to one another? Because I know, obviously, I'm not a mum, you guys are mums, but I often hear mums saying there is a lot of judgment between mums in choices and how you parent or how you... So are we sometimes a little bit also doing each other a disservice as a female community and supporting one another?
Yes.
In short. Yes.
Yeah, you're right. There is a lot of judgment. And it's everywhere. It's like between, midwife to midwife, mum to mum, I don't know what the answer is, but sometimes I think, so this might be slightly controversial, but I know that I support choice. But I'm also very big on people having the full story before they make a choice. And sometimes that's not always there.
Yeah.
So like I said, I'm very happy for people to choose to have elective cesarean sections. And I'm very happy for women to decide that they don't want to breastfeed their baby. But do they know the whole story? Do they know, why we would say this is maybe the best thing for your baby or yourself? And like Jasmine was saying before we turned the cameras on about the recovery for cesarean section. So do you understand that it's 6 weeks recovery? It's major abdominal surgery. And I think if you're okay with all of that, then that's fine. But I also think that within all of those choices that we need to accept that there is maybe a path that was made for the body, and that within that there is a benefit to having those hormones that you release when you go into labor, and understanding that maybe if they are not released during labor, does that also affect your recovery? I mean, I don't know whether it does or it doesn't, but I can't imagine that it wouldn't have some sort of part to play in your recovery. So I think the judgment sometimes comes when people think they're making their own choice and somebody's actually thinking, but is that choice really the best thing? And are you fully informed? And I also know there are people that have done it, they've done it the way they want to do it, and they're kind of almost like virtual signaling, like, I've done it really well, and there's no reason why everybody else shouldn't do it my way as well. So it's difficult because I wish we would just support each other a little bit more.
Just everyone has autonomy over their own bodies.
I think,
to make their own choices.
To make their own choices. I wish we would support each other more. But
Has this changed your mind?
We'll look after you.
We'll look after you.
I think there's a lot of fear that I need to work through.
But like that question that I asked at the beginning, though. So I actually worked with a doctor, and I used to think the same thing, but I worked with a doctor years ago, and she used to say to all of her clients who are having elective cesarean sections, that's brilliant, but what are you going to do if you go into labour the day before your cesarean section? Have you thought about that? Because nobody ever thinks about that. So again, it's like, like when women say, I don't want to feel any pain, I'm going to have the epidural. Have an epidural. But what happens when you come in fully dilated and a head between your legs? So you also need to be prepared for that as well, right? So yes, have your elective cesarean section, no problem. But also know that it might not necessarily go the way you planned. And maybe the not going the way you planned is that you're going to have the baby at home, you know?
You know what? I'll be honest. I think for me, I suffer with fibroids. I've had a lot of gynecological health conditions and issues. I've been in a lot of chronic pain for basically the majority of my 20s. Hence why I started Agora and my story and my journey. But I think I have some level of like PTSD that I need to work through. I'm terrified of any pain from like my uterus, my womb, any cramp. I think because I've lived with it for so long and I'm so scared of like heavy bleeding and all of the other things that if any woman has endometriosis, adenomyosis, PCOS, all the joyful things that we experience, you don't realize that actually going through that journey, like you think afterwards you're fine or you finally get to a place where you are maybe managing your condition. But then I do realize that when you start to think about things like birth or things that are, again, gynecological and related, you have that trauma. And I think for me, it's just that fear of the pain. What if it goes wrong? I've had such bad luck with everything else down there. What could happen? So I think I need to work on that, which probably a lot of women, like, you don't think about it. And maybe a lot of women just get pregnant and actually like skip that entirely. But I actually think if you do suffer with a gynecological condition, there is a certain level of psychological trauma that you experience, and how that relates to your birth, I also think is something we maybe need to look at. So I think right now, my answer is still, I would like to be as drugged up as possible. I would like it to be out of me as quickly as possible. Ideally, I don't even want to know it's happening.
You change your mind. You will.
Well, once I watch your next birth, if there's another one.
Which is going to be live streamed, is it?
I'll be at home. I'll be the doula, so I can live stream.
You will not be my doula.
I am. She doesn't know it yet, but I will be.
Oh, Lola, this has been such an informative conversation.
Thank you.
Really helped to just dispel any myths and give us a better and deeper understanding. And hopefully for our viewers as well, it just lightens up that load, gets them thinking about birth, labour, everything to do with the reproductive system in order to prepare them to live a life.
Yeah.
And hopefully empower women
Yeah.
to make informed decisions, educate themselves pre and post having their baby so that they can not enter into motherhood traumatized ultimately. And this is what we want for our people, and this is what we want for the community. So we want to say thank you so much.
Thank you for
sharing
me.
your knowledge and just coming today and having a good giggle with us.
Yes.
Lots of giggles.
Thank you so much.
Need to end with the right question.
Yeah, so at the end of our lovely series, we like to ask our guests what they believe their healing equation is. What equates their healing journey, and what is their healing equation?
Gosh, how does one answer that question?
Take your time.
How long have I got?
Well, it took us a couple of days to work out ours, so...
Oh, gosh, I don't know, actually. But I think, so my healing equation, gosh. So for me, at the moment, I have been doing a lot of self-reflection and also just reading up on history. Especially Nigerian history, because there's so much of it that I do not know. It's sort of in the back of my mind because I've heard people talking about it, but not necessarily been really educated on it. And I think for me, my healing equation is knowing a lot more about my history and appreciating a lot more of my ancestral wisdom and culture. And also being able to, not that I was ever ashamed of it, but I definitely, like we said at the beginning, I'm married to an Italian, but just even things like how I prioritize them speaking Italian over speaking Yoruba, because that's sort of, not that they can speak either, but that's a story for another day. But why did I think Italian was more important than Yoruba? I will rationalize it in my mind and say, but if they go to Europe, they can speak Italian, and nobody really speaks Yoruba apart from Nigerians. But does that matter?
Right.
Does it matter that they need to be able to use this language to, just even the thoughts of the fact that they're learning another language, and so they're using their brains a little bit more, and thinking how deep that decolonization needs to go with me. Even though I think I'm doing it, there's still so many things. And so I think my healing equation would be to continue learning about myself and my culture, and to never really ever put it on the back burner. And I know sometimes my children will roll their eyes when I start to say something about, like I said to them, this summer holiday, we need to have a plan of how this is going to go. And one of my things for them is that by the end of the summer holiday, they will learn to say a few sentences in Yoruba.
Nice.
And they have been learning it, but I know they roll their eyes, but well, you're going to do it. I don't really care. You might abandon this when you're older, but let it not be said that I didn't try. So I think that's my healing equation, really.
I absolutely love that. Yeah, much better than ours.
What were yours? I want to know now.
I don't think she has one.
I did, but I said mine was sitting on a beach and drinking rum, which I need to think
maybe
a bit
I should have
deeper
gone
on
for that.
one.
That's
No,
also
yours
like a
is much
healing
better.
equation. No, I
Yours
went
is
a bit
much
too
better.
deep, didn't I?
No. I'm just...
That's good, though. That's good.
That's what keeps me calm.
Well, maybe that's what I should have done.
Keeps you drunk.
Keeps you drunk.
Keeps me calm.
What was your one then, Jasmine?
Oh, goodness. My healing equation, similar to yours, it was just understanding self, learning self. Similar to you, it's understanding self, but also very simply just prioritizing rest. I've only just started to do that 2 years into being a mother. Is that the rest part is really important. If you're just on go, your cortisol levels just rise.
Yes.
And you're just always in fight or flight. And I think the first 2 years after having my C-section birth, it just felt like I was in fight or flight the whole time. And I never knew that was now my baseline. So prioritizing rest and bringing that cortisol level down, if that means taking a nap, not feeling ashamed that I need that rest, or just telling my partner, I can't give him a bath tonight, I need to go for a walk or go for a ride.
Your child, not your partner.
Both of them. Both. That for me became my healing equation. It was prioritizing self in all forms.
Good one.
Yeah.
Which is the same as yours, really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's really what
Just
I'm doing.
like-
It just mine didn't sound as deep as yours, but I'm prioritizing me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Lola. It's
Lola.
been such a pleasure having to
Thank you
chat
for
to you
having
today.
me. I enjoyed it. It was good fun.
Oh, thank you.
If you liked today's episode, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe.
Until next time.